Welcome everyone. I hope you all would be fine and well. So, Sivita, we were talking about an apology for poetry, and we have discussed almost most of the things there, but still some of the things are remaining. So, I thought we should complete those things, and I was unable to take online sessions, so that's why I thought that remaining things should be taught to you in recorded lecture because I'm recording this lecture, and this lecture is being recorded for the sake of your understanding. I hope it will help you to understand the concept of apology for poetry. Let me share my screen with all of you. Yes, here it is. I hope my PPT will be visible to all of you. So we have discussed already 3 points from the defense of poetry, which is done by the Philip Sidney, and the fourth point is remaining. And then I will explain to you the every charge and the answer of every charge from a different angle, from a different perspective as well, because I believe that it will help you to comprehend, to understand the concept of the defense of poetry, which is done by Sir Philip Sidney. Now let's move without further delay. Let's move further to the fourth point. So let me better explain to you, or let me remind you that we talked about the concept of the an apology for poetry, that why this essay is written, who's the person who wrote this essay. It is Philip Sidney. Why he wrote this essay and why he was encouraged to write this essay. So each and everything is discussed. I have also discussed the introduction. I have discussed the background history, and I have also discussed that the four backgrounds, the four grounds, or the 4 points, are the four charges which are made on poetry by Stephen. And then on those four grounds, on those four charges, Philip Sidney have just replied, and he has just defended poetry. And therefore, it is also known as an apology for poetry. So these all things are discussed. Then we discussed that Philip Sidney, he just divided poetry into two parts. The first is divine poetry, and the second is the utility of the social utility of the for the poetry. These were the two major types of the poetry proposed by Sir Philip Sidney. Then he further divided the divine poetry into four subcategories. And then we discussed three of them are already discussed, and the fourth is remaining. So today is the turn of that fourth category, the subcategory of divine poetry, that is, it can surpass the virtue of history and the philosophy. So let me discuss this point with all of you. See, but poetry unites the universal truths like history of every subject. See, but poetry unites the universal truths. First of all, unites, okay, universal truths. See, whenever you want to know something about ancient Greek or the history of ancient Greek and ancient Romans and the ancient history of human beings, then obviously it will help. Obviously, you will know that history through the poetry, because we have already discussed that there were the poets only, and they were the source of education at that time, even though the first law of this world is written in verse form. So that means poetry is there. If you want to know something about ancient Greek, then obviously you need to go through from the poetry of the time. You need to go through from the poets of the time. You need to go through from the written work of the time, and that written work is in the domain of poetry. So that will help you to unite the universal truths. The Let me give you an example that how to unite a universal truth. Whenever you will study the history of Plato, then you will find that he emphasized a lot about the concept of injustice. He talked about it. He said that if someone is in his good senses, comes to you and he says that, keep my weapons with you, and then I will come back and take weapons in my bag. So someone said that it is the justice if you pay the debts and be honest. If someone is honest and paying his debts, that is justice. So in that reply, he just said that when the person comes to you in a good senses, with good senses, and he gives his weapons to you, and then he says that I will come back and then I will take my weapons back. After some time, the person comes back and he's not in good, he's not in sound health, mental health is not sound at all, and he demands from you to give him his weapons back. So it would be justice to be honest with him and to pay his debts back. If we would be honest with him and pay his debts back, then that means we are not serving justice. Actually, we are serving the justice. But the definition which was proposed by that person, that to be honest and to pay the debts is justice. So that means in some situations you need to do something different. You need to do entirely against to the definition of the justice. But when you do that thing against the justice, but actually you are serving the justice. But if you will do according to that rule, then you are serving injustice. So that means he focused a lot on the justice. And there were other number of definitions and explanations given by other scholars, other researchers, and the Plato as well. So he used to discuss justice a lot. Now, more importantly, when you study his life, then you will his work, then you will find it in a verse form. It's in dialogues form. It's in a verse form. So that means that work, his life is written in the verse form, which comes in the domain of poetry. So now you are going to unite the universal truth about injustice, which is given by Plato, which is given by his fellow scholars. Now get that concept of justice and now see the concept of justice and injustice in a society. Now see, this concept will help you to understand the justice. The concept which is given by Plato and his fellow scholars will help you to understand the justice because it's universal. The justice is same in all around the world. The same justice is here, same injustice is here. The same injustice was at the time of Plato, same justice was also at the time of Plato. So you see, the concept of justice is same in every corner of the world. So poetry always helps to unite that concept, to unite that reality, to unite that truth. So when you studied the justice and justice from the ancient Greek, then you united the justice with the justice of Renaissance. Then you united the justice which is in present society. So see, it became possible for all of us to do that with the help of poetry, because the justice which is explained in the ancient Greek, it's explained in the domain of poetry. So that means poetry was there. So that's why we know that what kind of justice was there at the time. What was the injustice was there. So this is the concept. एक और किस्सा मुझे याद आ रहा है प्लेटो का. So once Plato was going from the fields and he saw the farmer. The farmer was harvesting his crop. So it was his habit to ask questions. So he asked questions that, what are you doing? He just said that I am harvesting my crop. So he said, that's good, that's enough. So how would you get that? So he said that, he said that, how's your crop? It seems that you did an excellent job. You are getting good corns. So he just said that, yes, indeed, I did a lot of hard work, and that's why I'm just getting this excellent crops, and now I will have a good share. He said, share? What do you mean by share? So he said that I need to pay to the noble and to the king as well, because in terms of tax. So he said that when you were sowing the this crop, then there was king, or any man from king came and helped you in the process to sow the seeds. He said, no, I was the one who sowed all seeds in my land, and then I was one who did hard work. Then he said, is there anyone from the king, from king himself, or His pen came to you to water the seeds. He said, no, I was the one. He said that was there anyone who helped you throughout the process from sowing the seed to the harvesting? He said, no, I was the one. He said that means from very beginning to the end till the harvesting point. The king was not involved at all. Neither any person from the king's side was involved. They did not help you. They did not assist you, neither financially nor physically. So why you are giving them a huge share from your harvest? So he said that it's a law and we need to follow the law. It's the order of king, so we need to follow. So he said that this is injustice. Plato says this is injustice because they are not involved. They are not investing any penny in the process, and neither they came physically. So how would they demand for a share from you? So he used to observe each and everything, and then he used to dig out the concept of justice and just injustice in a society. So so that means how we came to know, because that concept is written in the verse form, and the verse form is in the domain of poetry. So now when we will compare that kind of justice and injustice with our own society, so it will help us to unite that universal truth. I hope I'm making sense with that. So history of every subject, you see history, when you will trust the history of every subject, then obviously there are the universal truths, like the truth about tradition, truth about any culture, truth about the divine, the humans race, or the human beings, or the humanity. So you see every subject has its own history, and that is based on the truths, that is based on the actions, that is based on the events. So poetry always helps us to unite all those truths together. Poetry always helps us to unite those all actions and events together. So this is about poetry, that how it unites. I hope के अभी समझ में आया होगा. Poetry can deal both with philosophy and history at once, because even though the Aristotle said that poetry is important than history, because history can mislead you if the historian has if the historian is corrupted, and he has written history in his own way, then that means that will mislead you. So history is all about that what happened there, जो हुआ उसके बारे में ही स्पेसिफिक हिस्ट्री होती है. बट पोएट्री is not written that what happened, but poetry could be written about that what should have been happened, what should have not been happened, what is ideal, what is not ideal, what is best, what is not best. So that means somehow one way or other poetry is there to assist human beings, to assist humanity. But history does not assist human beings, even though many a times history can distract you, history can mislead you. So that's why it has its own importance, but poetry has more importance than the history. And more importantly, he says that the Sydney also says that the poetry deals with philosophy and history as well. If you want to know about the history, then poetry is there and it will help you know the history. Like I told you the history of Plato, you can know the history of Romans and Greek history, and ancient history, pre-Anglo-Saxon history, the history of English literature. So poetry is there to help you out to know about history. Similarly, poetry is there to know about the philosophy as well. Like Plato said that poetry does not teach philosophy. It has nothing to do with philosophy. It has not, because philosophy is idea, idea is reality, and that reality is philosophy. So the answer of that is that you see, when something ideal comes in the mind of a poet, he imagines something which has no existence. That means that is the idea in his mind. Then on the basis of that imagination, he composed the poetry. So that means the poetry is composed over the idea. According to Plato, idea is the reality and the reality is philosophy. So similarly, the poet is also similar to the philosopher because it deals with the idea, and on the basis of that idea, the imagination is best. Then from the imagination, the poem is composed. So that's why it deals with philosophy, and it also deals with the history as well. So that's why it deals with both of them, philosophy and history at once. It has the uniqueness. Poetry has this uniqueness to deal both of them at once. Now, the third point, it is in the hands of poet to take some significant actions of virtues and poetry and portray philosophy. यहाँ पर पोएट्री मैंने लिखा है, लेकिन यहाँ पर पोर्ट्रे होगा, ये मुझसे टाइपो हुआ है. So see beta, the poet always takes action which is related to the virtues. Poet always imitate the actions which are related to the morality, then he just portray them, and he just portray a philosophy related to the morality, related to the virtues, and he try to teach the human beings. He tries to teach them. He tries to convey a message through his poetry. He tries to educate them. So this is the reason that most of the poets do take such kind of actions related to the virtues and the morality, and they try to teach. So that's why it has a lot of importance. Poetry is as important as philosophy and history. Even it's better than history. ये तो point already हमने discuss कर लिया है. So this is how these are the four subtypes of poetry which I have discussed. Now, by these 4 points, 4 sub points, the poetry is defended. आप इन चारों points को बेटा देखेंगे तो poetry को defend किया है फिलिप सिडनी ने. Now, what I have done, I have tried my best to bring another way of defending, like there is another perspective of an apology for poetry, and the defense of poetry is done from another perspective as well, the same poetry, but एक और एंगल भी है इसका कि हमने एक तो इस एंगल से इसको देखा है, लेकिन there is another angle. So I'm going to teach you the defense of poetry from that angle as well, and I hope that angle will help you to comprehend each and everything very clearly and easily. So see beta, first of all, before going to that angle, we must know that what are the charges which are made on poetry. These are the charges of Gorson. He made on the charges on poetry and the plays as well. Now, if you remember, I had told you that beta, when Stephen Gorson was writing the abuse of I don't remember, the school of abuse. Yes, when he was writing the school of abuse, so in his book, he just criticized not only on poetry but on plays as well, because he just criticized on the English plays and the English poetry. So and he also dedicated his work to Sir Philip Sidney, and he just got encouragement, and then he wrote an apology for poetry in 1585, and he wrote after 6 years when the School of Abuse was written. So after 6 years he wrote an essay, and that essay is very complex. So see beta, in that essay, he only focused on these 4 points, because Stephen Gorson attacked on poetry on these 4 grounds. Poetry is the waste of time. Poetry is the mother of lies. It is nurse of abuse. Plato had rightly banished poets from his ideal world. So these are the 4 grounds on which he attacked on the poetry. But he also attacked on the plays as well. But in the literary essay, in an apology for poetry, Sir Philip Sidney did not went for the defense of the plays, but he went for the defense of poetry only. It has the reason. Now, what is the reason, beta? You see, the Plato had attacked on the poetry on the basis of 3 grounds, like a pragmatic ground, philosophical ground, and ethical grounds. These were the 3 grounds on which Plato had attacked on the poetry. Apart from that, he had also talked about the imitation as well, that the poet is imitator, and poetry is imitation of imitation, and that is removed twice from the reality. So on these 3 grounds, Aristotle had written in a book which is the Poetics, and in Poetics it was further divided into two parts, and the first part is like a tragedy, and the second part is comedy. So comedy part is lost, and the tragedy part survived. So see, beta, in the first tragedy part, he Aristotle defended poetry on those three grounds: pragmatic, philosophical, and ethical. These were the three grounds. On those three grounds, he defended the poetry. He also talked about the imitation, because the originator of the word imitator was the concept of imitation was came from the Plato's Republic. So he refined the word and he just explained the imitation over there. So see, beta, I'm trying to give you the background of an apology of poetry, that why he did not went for the defense of plays. He went for the defense of poetry only because he had the background, because he got the information, he got the idea, he got a lot of information from the Plato's attack on the poetry and the poets. Then he had the Poetics, in which Aristotle defended the poetry on those three grounds. So he had a fair idea that how the Plato has attacked on poetry, how the Aristotle had defended the poetry, how the concept of imitation was given by Plato, how the concept of imitation is defended as explained by Aristotle. So he had a fair idea about this whole process. So that's why he went for the defense of poetry only, and he wrote an apology for poetry, which means the defense of poetry. So he found that the poetry is attacked on four grounds. यहाँ पर आप देखेंगे तो प्लेटो ने तीन ग्राउंड्स पे पोएट्री को अटैक किया था: प्रैग्मेटिक, फिलोसॉफिकल एंड एथिकल। बट यहाँ पर चार ग्राउंड्स पे पोएट्री को अटैक किया गया है। सो ही यूज्ड द सेम टेक्निक व्हिच वाज डन बाय द एरिस्टोटल। इसने मैसा फिलिप सिडनी ने उनकी टेक्निक को यूज किया, एंड देन ही आंसर्ड एवरी चार्ज सीक्रेटली। उसने हर चार्ज को अपने तरीके से और उसके बैकग्राउंड में जाकर उसको डीपली स्टडी करके एंशिएंट ग्रीक से लेके उसको कोट करके उसको एग्जांपल दिया है कि पोइट्री इज नॉट द वेस्ट ऑफ टाइम। तो इस तरह से इसने वन बाय वन करके इन चारों चार्जेस के आंसर के, एंड दिस टेक्निक इज फॉलोड बाय द टेक्निक ऑफ एरिस्टोटल व्हिच इज डन इन पोएटिक्स। सो दिस इज द बैकग्राउंड बेटा। एंड मैंने ये बताया कि आप लोगों को पता होना चाहिए कि व्हाई ही डिड नॉट वेंट फॉर द डिफेंस ऑफ प्लेस। वो प्लेस के डिफेंड में नहीं गया, बट ही वेंट फॉर द डिफेंस ऑफ पोएट्री, एंड so that therefore he wrote an apology for poetry. So अब ये दूसरी टेक्निक है कि इसमें how he did defended poetry। अच्छा, बात एक ही है, लेकिन पहले जो हमने चार पॉइंट्स पढ़े हैं उनमें एक एक अलग तरीके से दिखाया गया है, और इसमें एक अलग तरीके से दिखाया गया। बात वही एक है बेटा, वन वे और अदर वे बात वही एक ही है, लेकिन इट्स डिफरेंट, इट्स अ डिफरेंस ऑफ एक्सप्लेनेशन कि ये जो मेथड है इट इज प्रपोज्ड बाय अ स्कॉलर। ये किसी और स्कॉलर ने प्रपोज्ड किया था और उसने इस मेथड को प्रेफर किया। इस he read the an apology for poetry, then he proposed this method, and that method, the first which is discussed, that was proposed by someone else. So see, every scholar has his own approach to comprehend the things. So मैंने सोचा कि मैं दोनों ही मेथड से आपको समझा देता हूँ ताकि it would help you to comprehend the thing. Another angle of defense of poetry by Sydney. Answer of the first charge, पहले चार्ज का आंसर ये है। Now go further back. The first charge क्या है? Poetry is waste of time. एक मिनट बेटा, give me a minute. Yes, but I'm back. Sorry, because I was being called by my mom, so that's why I thought I should talk to her for a few minutes. So yes, beta, the first charge is poetry is the waste of time. Now let's move further to see the answer of this charge specifically. Let me change my slide. Okay, the answer of first charge: poetry is the source of knowledge. You see, in the first interpretation, which we have already discussed, and in that interpretation we just talked that how the poetry is known as the first source of knowledge, because when we trace the history of ancient Greek and Romans, then we would come to know that actually the teachers were poets, philosophers were poets, even though even the Plato was a poet as well, because he wrote in a verse form, and he was a teacher as well. So the source of knowledge was poetry. The knowledge was transferred from one man to another, from man to society, through the poetry, and it was the only source which was being used to educate people. And for Sydney, Gosen attacks on poetry, saying that it corrupts the people. Actually, Gosen just said that it is the waste of time and the poetry corrupts the people, because he believes that whenever someone would go through from the poetry, then his minds and the heart, the mind and the heart of that person will be corrupted, and that person would act very inaccurately, very, and that person would be involved in wrongdoings, and that person would become a bomb for the whole society. That person will become beast, living beast in the society, which will be harmful for the people around him or her. So because the poetry always there is the similar concept of Plato as well, that Plato said that the poetry encourages the weaker part of soul, and that weaker part of soul becomes dominant over entire human body, and when that becomes dominant, then human beings become, they can turn into the wild animal, and they can turn into the monsters. More importantly, that happens only because of the poetry, because the weaker part of the soul becomes dominant. Why that becomes dominant? If someone is cheated, if someone is victim of if someone is fall in love, or if someone likes someone, then when that person would go through from the poetry, then his mind will be corrupted. He'll become victim of sufferings and issues and problems, and he will become victim of sadness. So then the weaker part of the soul will become dominant over entire body. When that will part become dominant over the entire body, so that person will become beast, and he can do anything in the society. So that means he would be very dangerous to the society. Similarly, here Stephen also believes that the poetry corrupts the minds and the hearts of human beings, especially the poetry corrupts the minds and the hearts of young generations. It diverts the minds of young generation. It diverts their ways, it diverts their actions, and they get themselves involved in wrongdoings and wrong activities only because of the poetry, because it encourages them to become beast. So he criticized poetry, but in the answer, he just Sydney just says the poetry is the source of knowledge. It is not the waste of time, and it is not corrupting people. But Sydney says that no learning is so good as that which teaches and moves to virtue, and that nothing can both teach and amuse as much as poetry does. He says that poetry can never ever corrupt the minds of people, but actually it educates people. It amuses people, it delights people. It is the source of it is the source of delightness. It is the source of education. So the early education was done through the poetry. the early the man was being delighted through the poetry. Like I had also given you an example that if you trace the ancient history, then you would come to know that they were the noblemen, they were the people who belonged to the elite class, they were kings, they were queens, and they used to hire a poet in their courts, and the poet used to sing for them. That poem used to recite poetry for them, so he used to delight everyone in the court. So it was the source of delightness, it was the source of education, and together it was the source of teaching virtue and morality to the human beings. More importantly, it is the first device which can teach and which can delight at the one place. Together, it has the ability to do both of things together. So that's why it has a lot of importance, and it cannot be said that it is the waste of time. When it is not the waste of time, but people are being delighted with the poetry. Many a times people are being delighted, many a times people are being educated, many a times people are being educated and delighted at once. So it would be injustice to say that poetry is waste of time. So he says that he remembers ancient Greek societies that respected poets, even though he also in his essay, he gives an examples from the ancient Greeks that the poets used to be respected a lot, and they were wherever in any society, if there was a poet, then the poet was regarded a nobleman. That poet used to be respected a lot. So it had respect on another level. So that's why it was not the poetry is not for the waste of time. The poets are always to be looked up, so poetry is not the waste of time. I hope कि अभी आपको समझ में आया होगा कि poetry waste of time बेटा नहीं है. It is not the waste of time. The poetry is there to teach, poetry is there to delight, poetry is the source of knowledge, and poetry is the source of light, because with the help of poetry the light was transferred from one man to another, from one man to society. Like the person from elite class was educated, then he was given light by the poet, then that man used to teach his children, he used to teach his family. So if you are gone through, if you have watched the series the Game of Thrones, then you will see that when the Arya Stark became the slave, and then his master asked him, the king of the Blackwater, just asked her that who taught you to read and write, because it was impossible for everyone to read and write. But she said that my father, luckily my father was a educated person, so he taught me that. From that point, you can come to know that only people who belong to elite class, they were being taught. That means if someone is taught by the poet during the ancient time, then the family member used to teach to his family members. And even though they used to hire tutors, they were also poets, and they used to teach to their children. They used to teach them philosophy. They used to teach them poetry. So that means poetry was the source of light. Poetry was the first source of delight. Poetry was the first source of education. So in that way, you need to understand the answer of first charge. I hope कि अभी आपको अच्छे से समझ में आया होगा कि what does this mean. And apart from that, when you are going to understand the first charge, then you need to understand the concept of attack of the poetry as well. Like he attacked on the poetry from the perspective that it's the waste of time. ये बात कही है उसने कि it is poetry is the waste of time. More importantly, he just says that poetry always corrupts the minds of young generations and the minds of the people. So you see, in that regard, फिर आपने ये भी कहना, आपने एक और भी चीज ध्यान में रखनी होगी कि I have taught you the what is the attack on poetry which is done by the Plato. Plato ने poetry के जब attack किया है, तो what does he just say about that? What did he say about the poetry? What he said about the poetry and how he attacked on the poetry. So you need to keep that thing in your mind as well. So now let's move further to our next charge, our next answer. So let's move further better.